I think in some ways, the skyline of a city can be compared to a human face, that you can read into those features an enormous amount of a city's personality.
New York is a city of tall buildings. That's its essential identity. The Twin Towers were limited in many ways, but they were maximum skyline. And for a lot of people, they were part of orienting yourself in New York because you could see them from almost everywhere. And with it gone, you feel that loss. And I think in the end, it's a struggle for New York to get its city back.
Broken lines, broken strings, broken threads, broken springs, broken idols, broken heads, people sleeping in broken beds. Ain't no use jiving, ain't no use joking. Everything is broken. Broken bottles, broken plates, broken switches, broken gates, broken dishes, broken pots. Streets are filled with broken hearts, broken words never meant to be spoken. Everything is broken.
New York City's response to 9/11 and the immediate aftermath was exemplary. It was just, I think, wonderful in terms of people genuinely opening their hearts and literally, in many cases, embracing each other. People who had nothing in common except geography, suddenly realizing they had everything in common. They were a family, one community. And I think that's fantastic. And I think it felt great at the time. You know, it didn't last forever. It wasn't ever going to last forever. It would be nice, you know, to have that kumbaya moment just go on and on and on and on. Ain't gonna happen, ain't ever gonna happen, and ain't ever gonna happen here. Here you have perhaps the most valuable 16 acres on the face of the earth. And suddenly it's gone. And these 16 acres at the center of the cosmos are empty and fair game. What fills that vacuum depends on who you are. And the tug of war began immediately.
Less than 2 months ago, Larry Silverstein's real estate company spent more than $3 billion to lease the World Trade Center towers for 99 years. Last Tuesday, he not only suffered a professional loss when the landmark buildings came crashing down, but a personal one as well. Several of his employees are among the missing.
I've had the most gut-wrenching experience of my life. And to lose for my people, their families, the devastation that's been wrought to that part of Manhattan.
Many people see that site now really as hallowed ground because there are thousands of bodies that are entombed there. I mean, should we build a structure on that site?
Well, I believe we should.
Hello. Okay, David, how are you?
Larry Silverstein was vilified immediately as the greedy developer because people in New York don't know any other kind of developer.
It wouldn't surprise me if the replacement of the twin 110-story towers ultimately results in the creation of 4 towers, perhaps 50, 55, maybe 60 stories in height.
The first thing he did was he came out with a a plan for the site, a kind of sketch plan for the site that rebuilt all of the square footage to the inch, and then threw in a little park. And that was a week after the attack, too early. Then he told the Wall Street Journal that it would be a tragedy for him not to rebuild.
We came down, I think, a day or two later, and it was awful. It was awful. I mean, you couldn't describe it. And there were firemen all over the site trying to find comrades, policemen trying to find. I mean, it was excruciating.
One of the things people forget about the event and the redevelopment is this little special period of time between the Tuesday of the attack and the Friday when George Bush came to town. There was a sense, I think among, I don't think I was alone in feeling it, that it was an open narrative.
I want you all to know it can't go any louder.
Then Bush came to town on Friday the 14th, and he was touring the site, and someone he was speaking to the hard hats who were cleaning the place up, standing on this pile of God knows what, and someone said, "I can't hear you." And he said, fairly famously,
I can hear you! I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
As this was an attack on our freedom narrative came into being, pressure on the site, in addition to all the other things that go into a construction site, the pressure on the site became, this is our response, and it has to be defiant. In a context where it's already very difficult to do anything, the site was being asked to do the impossible. No commercial office building that I know of in the history of offices and commerce has ever been asked to also be a symbol of defiant renewal, or a symbol of vengeance, or a symbol of healing. It's just not what skyscrapers do. All of a sudden, there's this idea that this building is somehow going to do something architectural that will magically make everyone feel better.
I really believe we shouldn't think about this site out there, right beyond us, right here, as a site for economic development. And we should think about a soaring, monumental, beautiful memorial. This is going to be a place that's remembered 100 and 1,000 years from now, like the great battlefields of Europe and of the United States. We have to be able to create something here that enshrines this forever.
When Mayor Giuliani gave his farewell address, he suggested that nothing should be rebuilt here, that it simply become a memorial, a large, serene memorial to the people who died on 9/11. There was never any chance of that happening. I think the mayor knew it. I think the proof that he knew it was to create the LMDC, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, in order to pass that along to George Pataki for fear that a mayor who was not a Republican was going to succeed Giuliani.
The LMDC was right after September 11th. Mayor Giuliani and I sat down and said, we're going to need massive assistance. We're going to have help from Washington. We're going to have insurance proceeds. And we need a vehicle whose sole purpose, so they won't get distracted, will be to make sure that the funds are appropriately targeted.
The governor of New York is central to what eventually happens in Lower Manhattan. Here's why. Two agencies, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation and the Port Authority, control the process, and New York's governor controls half of each.
There's no single person involved with the redevelopment who had as much sway on it as George Pataki. He achieved that position by creating the LMDC and initially packing it with his cronies and using it as, as almost like control rods to change the pace of the process. I mean, at some points he would slow it down, at some points he would speed it up, purely to suit his needs at any given point, which were profound because he was running for re-election during the process.
Here in our area, a jury will begin deliberating over how much money will be available to rebuild the World Trade Center complex. Developer Larry Silverstein is suing several insurance companies, claiming the attack on the Twin Towers was two separate events. The insurers say it was one. Billions of dollars are at stake on the outcome.
First issue, one event's two events. We needed, as it turned out, we needed two events because to rebuild the Trade Center, the cost to rebuilding the Trade Center would require not just $3.5 billion, require closer to $7 billion, right? Needed more money.
I think he was preoccupied with this bizarre legal theory that there were two buildings and therefore it was two separate incidents and therefore he got to double his return. Most of us at the LMDC thought just logically that that would be a silly result. You know, you have an insurance policy on two buildings for a set number. Yeah, I don't see mathematically how you're going to end up with more than the set number.
People argued about it a little bit like it was common sense, but believe me, anyone who's read an insurance policy knows it's not a common sense industry. It's all about the specific language and what it means. And in fairness, that was essential to protect the possibility of rebuilding, that somebody talk about how are we going to get the money to do this. The result was that Larry was typecast, I think, early on in the process as somebody who was fighting about money while people were worrying about human loss and then about whether we were going to build something great, and Larry was off fighting about money.
They did everything they possibly could to excoriate, to criticize, to denigrate. It was just a constant flow. Talk about needing a thick skin for that. Let me tell you, I just had to get thick fast. Born in Brooklyn, it was not a very pretty part of Brooklyn. Certainly not one of the best, probably one of the worst. I remember we lived at the top of either a 6 or a 7-story walk-up. It had the best view, but you had to walk up. It was not a very luxurious existence. My parents obviously were struggling. And then after that, I went to NYU. And by this time, my father had gravitated into the real estate business. He became a real estate broker. He read someplace that real estate was the foundation of wealth. So he decided to become a broker. I said, the guys who make the money are the guys who own the buildings. I said, we got to become an owner. I remember finding a building down on East 23rd Street. So I remember finding out how much it was, $600,000 for the building. $600,000. Where did you get $600,000? So what we did, we went to the people my father had successfully leased stores and lofts to. And then I made the pitch and asked them if they'd be willing to join us for a small investment in this building. And one after another, finally said yes. Then we bought buildings, bought larger buildings, then we renovated buildings, we altered them, we modernized them. And then ultimately, it led to finally digging the foundation, pouring the slab, and building the building.
7 World Trade Center was developed in the early 1980s because the Port Authority had a piece of land just north of the World Trade Center site, and they decided to develop it. And Silverstein won the bid. And so all of a sudden, Silverstein was at a new level.
But I remember at the topping out ceremony of 7, looking up at the Twin Towers and saying to myself, God, look at this, but my building's big. It's a 2 million foot building. It's a big building. But look at that stuff. Huge. And there are 2 of them, right? Massive. I said, wouldn't it be fantastic if someday I own those? Got it done. And therein started the Odyssey, 6 weeks before 9/11.
I think the towers should be built back. I think they should be built tall, if not taller. I liked the comment earlier about a library. I always said I wanted a school.
You could also have an exhibition hall. You could have a concert hall. There's enough room there.
How could you build on a sacred ground? The whole site should be a memorial.
Our new World Trade Center towers must be at least 111 stories tall.
People are starting to think about what's going to be created there. And ultimately, there's a debate about what should happen at the World Trade Center site, which is classic New York, with everybody taking very strong opinions that pull in totally opposite directions, where a lot of different people are fighting for the one thing that they want. What ought to be rebuilt there? How do we respond to 9/11?
I should call Sally and tell him I'm 2 minutes away. Excuse me. Sorry. See if you get behind all these slow people, you know? I'm fine, Jimmy. Good to see you. Hi, Norman. I thought we were... Good morning. My name is Rosaline Talon. This is my mother, Eileen. We lost my brother, Sean Patrick Talon. He was a probationary firefighter at Ladder 10, which is the firehouse of the World Trade Center. If you look at Oklahoma City, those families are really an integral part of the process, the decision-making process. So just at a minimum, that's what we're asking. Include us in the process, because to this point, we have not been included.
We knew he was always going to be either a policeman or a fireman. It was just, you know, as they say, it's in the Irish. The first tower collapsed. And then we arrived home and we watched the tower on TV. And we knew that Sean was up there because his company would have been first due to the scene. So there was no doubt in our minds that he was in there. I remember standing at the precipice right outside the firehouse door. These people are buried inside there. I mean, loved ones. I mean, knowing Sean was in there, I mean, my God, like looking at that pile and knowing that my little brother was in there and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Because of the enormity of what happened and all of these people dying there, my parents were definitely hoping that the site could, say, be a green field of remembrance. But we realized that wasn't going to be. There were too many commercial and real estate interests that, you know, they had to build back up their square footage.
One of the things that people don't appreciate is that there was an enormous economic fallout after September 11th. We lost 100,000 private sector jobs that morning. We lost millions of square feet of office space. Companies were leaving New York, so it had to get built. And the initial plan was let the Port Authority do it.
I was having dinner at the local pub around the corner from my apartment, and somebody was sitting next to me, and they said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I run the Port Authority." And they said, "Does that mean you do the bus scheduling?" And I had to explain that the Port Authority was a little more than the bus terminal.
Port Authority built the Lincoln Tunnel and the George Washington Bridge and many of our biggest transportation facilities, and it also built the World Trade Center.
I obligated myself to pay the ground rent of $120 million a year to the Port Authority for 99 years, which is like in perpetuity, with no abatements of any kind, because no one anticipated a 9/11 event.
You know, it stuck in his craw that he had to do that, but the fact of the matter is he was insured to do that. It's called business interruption insurance, and you continue paying your rent.
Here was Larry Silverstein paying, I think, $10 million a month ground rent on nothing.
Well, plans are moving ahead to rebuild one of the buildings destroyed in the World Trade Center attacks. 7 World Trade Center collapsed several hours after the Twin Towers fell. The owner of the 47-story building hopes to break ground on a new structure on September 11th.
So once we started designing the building, people came out of the woodwork and said, Silverstein, you're crazy. No one's going to come back down. I mean, this is foolhardy. Second of all, you've got that burning mass immediately to the south of you. It's ground zero. It's a mess. I mean, how is anybody come back down? I mean, it's foolishness. I mean, you're really doing yourself irreparable harm.
7 World Trade Center, we were able to get the building going very quickly because it was just us and the Port Authority, and that was it. We didn't have to deal with a ton of different government agencies. Across the street was totally different. On the city side, we had the mayor, the Economic Development Corporation, the Industrial Development Agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Transportation, Department of Design and Construction, the Police Department, the Fire Department, the Buildings Department, the City Council, and the local community board. On the state level, we had the Empire State Development Corporation, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the State Historic Preservation Office, the New York State Department of Transportation, the New York State Office of Emergency Management, and then even at the federal level, we had Congress, we had the White House Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Federal Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, SBA, EDA, OSHA, and not to forget the Army Corps of Engineers. So it just went on and on and on.
I started calling meetings of the heads of all the agencies and Silverstein and so on. And the meetings had 50, 60 people in the room. It was completely unworkable. Tremendous cross currents. The Silverstein and the Port Authority wanted 10 million square feet of office space. And at the other end, some victims' families wanted this to be hallowed ground. They wanted nothing. There was another group that said that they wanted to see the Twin Towers rebuilt exactly as the Twin Towers. From the beginning, I was pretty pessimistic that this could actually be corralled.
Once the site was cleaned up, people expected something to arise magically from the dust. Hey, it's New York City. Let's get it done yesterday. But I don't think people get the complexity of the site, especially below grade, and the fact that it's literally a couple of 100 feet from a big river, and that it ain't easy to keep that river from pushing through the earth on this site. And in fact, that was one of the most daunting, if not the most daunting challenge of the original, building the original Twin Towers, was how do you keep the Hudson River out?
The site actually consisted of waterlogged landfill, which had accumulated over 2 centuries out of old wharves and debris. To support the great weight of the towers, foundations would have to be dug down 70 feet to bedrock. An underground wall was built completely sealing the site. Excavation began.
Given the ownership, given the emotion, given the technical engineering challenges, you couldn't have a more difficult site. But everybody knew that. And you just, it's what you have.
What we decided to do was engage a firm called Beyer Blinder Bell. And so Beyer Blinder Bell came in and they became the architects of record.
They were hired by the LMDC to just crunch the numbers and show what could happen spatially in that place using these numbers dictated by Larry Silverstein's lease. With this big pile of square footage in this kind of little area, what are we going to do? And what's possible? So Beyer Blinder Bell was working on these designs, and the public desire for a meaningful, symbolic architectural solution was sort of building through the months. And they happened to converge in public in the Javits Center in this very high-tech, super-managed, so-called 21st century town meeting.
6 proposals are on the table. Today, 5,000 New Yorkers will have a chance to voice their opinions about those plans at a meeting called Listening to the City.
have to sort of acknowledge some great architecture, but it's that the place is sort of charged with meaning on so many levels and layers, and that it is one way to have a somber yet not offensive memorial.
I just want to see as much left that was there before September 11th, still there after this area has been reconstructed.
And everybody could participate. They had little computer boards, and everybody could vote for everything, and everybody could talk and so on.
Sometimes when you look at all of this, you wonder, like, where's the memorial? Have we just moved on and created tax-free shopping days?
Well, we don't like the fact that the green is an isolated rectangle with buildings around it.
Not enough green.
Go back to the drawing. Get new architects.
And the comments in real time would show up on a screen, because the typing would show right up there, and then people would vote for what they liked and didn't like. And somewhere about 2/3 of the way through the meeting, a comment showed up on the screen saying, "I hate all these plans. They look like Albany." Okay? And I really think that captured the day, because I think everybody looked up to, yeah, they kind of do.
It was a perfectly good plan for a site that didn't have the emotional and historic importance to America. But from that sense, it was unacceptable. So at that point, we said no.
After the Beyer-Blinder-Bell plans were essentially shot down, publicly at the Javits Center, the Pataki messaging machine was in a little bit of a crisis, because the election was approaching, and the idea that he, quote unquote, wasn't doing enough at Ground Zero fast enough had already been injected into the campaign. And then, so there was a moment of the LMDC sort of casting around saying, what now?
I called an emergency meeting of the LMDC, and I said, look, we got to scrap this thing. This is nowhere. These plans stink. Everybody knows they stink, and we got to do something. Well, okay, what do you want to do? I said, I want to have an architectural competition, a true competition.
We are going to go out and have a process and engage some of the world's greatest architects.
And the next step was to seek out the visionaries.
The LMDC is now looking for new international design teams to come up with still more concepts using broad guidelines that include a tall symbol or structure seen in the skyline. The footprints of the original Twin Towers would remain undeveloped.
By the following December, every network in the world set up to film this dramatic unveiling of the new future of Ground Zero.
We're about to see 7 very different visions by some extraordinary thinkers in their approach to the restoration of hope and optimism to Lower Manhattan.
We try to make with these United Towers what we call a city in the sky, which at the 60th floor, these towers come together and join.
The 2 tall towers in the middle are each 1,400 feet tall. They symbolize triumph that was sort of universal. They're standing there on big shoulders with their hands in the air.
In actual fact, it's 2 towers which kiss and touch and become one.
When I first started on the competition, everybody had an idea. Every New Yorker, every member of the family, every uncle, aunt, niece, and nephew, every acquaintance, when they found out that I was doing it, I have an idea. Do this, do this. This should be. And it suddenly occurred to me that this was really not just an architecture issue. It was an issue of the soul of people, because everyone was somehow part of that day.
More than a physical solution.
We had a broad spectrum, but it was clear that there were 2 that emerged. One was Daniel Libeskind and one was Raphael Vignoli.
We started this process essentially by defining for ourselves a principle, what we felt was a moral obligation, which was not only to remember the ones that perished in this tragedy, but also to use their memory, to elevate their memory, to become the inspiration for a better future.
The Vignoli plan was very, very different. The Vignoli plan had these round cylinders, if you will, that you could see through. The idea was that they were preserving as hallowed ground the space in which people died. Well, this was spunky. This was really different and really interesting.
The skyline of Manhattan is restructured, reconstructed with the icons of the public life. Thanks.
And I'm now happy to present Daniel Libeskind.
Thank you very much. I arrived by ship to New York as a teenager, an immigrant, and like millions of others before me, my first sight was that of the Statue of Liberty and the amazing skyline of Manhattan. I have never forgotten that sight or what it actually stands for. This is what this project is all about.
Everyone had been looking for a leader, someone to put a non-political, non-bureaucratic face on the process, and all of a sudden arrives this guy with the perfect backstory and the ability to present it, super effectively.
I grew up in Poland, and then to America, where my father had his only surviving sister who survived Auschwitz from a family of 10 brothers and sisters. So he was determined to come to New York. It represented everything that people dreamed about, and it still does.
Those who were lost have become heroes. To commemorate those lost lives, I created 2 large public spaces, the Park of Heroes and the Wedge of Light. The sky will become home again to a towering spire, 1,776 feet tall, creating an icon that speaks to our vitality in the face of danger and our optimism in the aftermath of tragedy.
When asked to do this thing, which is so impossible that it's almost magic, architects can fill in the difference by attaching words to the project. People understand words. And Libeskind's architecture always comes heavily loaded with words. And the design he presented at Ground Zero with the Matrix of Heroes and the Wedge of Light and the tower that through its height somehow spoke about the Declaration of Independence, all of that stuff bridges the gap between what can be, very funny looking architecture and things that real people can actually understand. Because I'm going to make you feel better about September 11th is not a thing that a building can say.
It's 76 feet high, very important, and it is not just about nations, it's about ecological zones, ecological regions. The 20 upper stories will be developed into very spectacular, it's like a park standing vertically, and of course...
Daniel Libeskind read the political landscape perfectly and pitched to the city and the world and the powers that be a kind of merging of a hip architecture that was also flag-waving.
I was so engaged in it, I thought it was phenomenal, but I didn't know what other people would think. So I went home that night, and I started looking at newspapers. And I looked around at tomorrow morning's papers, and I looked, there's a site where you can find every newspaper in the world. And I must have looked at 300 that night. I did it almost all night, just looking, I just couldn't believe it. I kept telling my wife, look at this, God, there's, in the middle of nowhere, Malaysia, here it is. One or more of those images was on the front page of every newspaper in the world. And I think that wasn't lost on Vignoli and Libeskind, and somebody was going to win, and therefore the stakes were unbelievably high, and they wanted to win. So it did get a little naughty.
After Libeskind and Think are sort of selected as finalists, there was, campaigns of muttering.
Everybody wants to win, and if you're naive, you don't know what kind of forces are arrayed against you. There was not a minute that was just go relax, meditating. It was a constant, passionate sort of struggle.
I mean, the kind of things, the sort of Rovian political tactics taken into the world of architecture and being propagated by amateurs. So it was a good time for all.
It was blood sport, and these guys were going for the biggest prize that architecture had ever seen, and there was a lot at stake for them.
Libeskind had chosen to leave the pit empty, preserved as a memorial. So his opponents started whispering that it was a pit of death and an open grave, and kind of, there's a lot of ways to see how that gesture could be perceived as inappropriate. And then the think team went, very high up in the air with these open steel kind of Eiffel Towers. So the Libeskins started saying that they were skeletons in the sky.
So we finally came to the point of determining who we wanted to win, and we chose Vignoli's plan.
It was early in the morning. I remember being in a car, taxi in New York, going somewhere in Lower Manhattan, and the headline, the day before the competition was to be judged in the New York Times, was scheme selected, scheme X selected. It was not my scheme. And of course, when I read that headline, I was crushed.
I remember waking up in the morning and seeing on the front page of the Times that the LMDC is going to choose the Vignoli plan, and going, no, this can't be, because I thought the Vignoli plan, 1, was unbuildable, 2, was economically unsound, and 3, where the footprints had these skeletons really rising into the sky that, to me, symbolized the destruction of the past instead of the hope of the future. And I just thought it was a terrible idea.
He just ripped Vignoli's plan. And he said it looks like these oil tanks in New Jersey, and no one's ever going to want to walk in there. They're going to fall down, just all this stuff. So now we were in a pretty awful position here, because the LMDC had voted, not just as the site committee, but as the full LMDC, and expressed a clear preference for Vignoli. And basically, Pataki came in and kind of just pulled the rug out from under the LMDC, and he reversed the decision.
What a great day. Good to see you. Great day. This is a great day.
And so, in a sense, the Libeskind plan became his plan.
It suddenly dawned on me what immense responsibility I have. It wasn't just, oh, great. Oh, my God, now, with these few lines on paper, how am I going to be able to do what I promised to do?
Out of this gaping wound in the heart of the New York Financial Center, where the 1,300-foot-tall Twin Towers once stood, an even taller building will rise.
The design plan has an inspiring spire.
It's the biggest challenge, the most profoundly moving, emotionally, intellectually, architecturally, spiritual project I've ever dealt with, of course.
For 3 months, Libeskind gave Pataki everything he needed.
Mr. Libeskind?
He got in front of any camera and told a gripping story, and there was imagery to attach to it. Then it was, ringing the right political bells, and everyone was happy, except for Larry Silverstein.
Larry actually preferred Libeskind's entry to the others. But once it became clear that Libeskind wanted to design the building, in addition to being the master planner, we did get into a little conflict with him, because Libeskind had done a couple of buildings of moderate size, some architecturally dramatic ones, including the museum in Berlin. But he'd not done a skyscraper. He'd not done a very tall tower, which is a completely different exercise.
What Libeskind was picked for was the master plan. He was not picked to design and build skyscrapers, something he had never done.
So as Larry Silverstein explained to Libeskind once when we were having a meeting, he said, Dan, if I'm going to have open heart surgery, I want to have somebody who's done it before. And a building of 1,700 feet in height is the architectural equivalent of open heart surgery. And Dan's wife, who is his partner in his practice, said, he's a quick learner. And Larry said, not on my heart, you're not going to learn how to do open heart surgery.
This meeting is over. We're done. She says, don't get excited. I said, I'm not excited. I said, just want to say, this meeting's over. I'm having no further discussion about building design. It's off the table. Finished.
Here's a man with money, with power, with the idea that it belongs to him. He had his own ideas with his own architects.
Larry came to me and he said, your trade in life, what you're a specialist is tall office buildings. I need you to do this.
Larry announced the truth, which is he's going to do the building with his the architect he chose, which is David Childs of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. He did the Worldwide Plaza building. He did the Bank of New York Operations Center. He's done a lot of big buildings.
David is a very accomplished, very powerful architect running a firm of thousands of people. It was really kind of David and Goliath.
It was a functioning, operating office building in a capitalistic society. This was not just a piece of sculpture there in the air.
Sometime in the middle of the summer, we were summoned to a meeting at the offices of the LMDC, and there was a negotiation.
Libeskind and Childs were literally thrown into a room together.
You've got to have somebody in charge. You can't have two generals. You've got to have one that has 51% of the vote. And so that's what I insisted on.
Oh, you in trouble. No, Mike, it's not a press conference, it's a photo op.
Which one's Charles? You ever seen happier faces in your life?
Yeah. Once or twice. It's a great day. It's a great day. It's going to be a fantastic collaboration. Yeah. We have to roll up our sleeves. We got to get to work.
If body language says anything, this is the picture.
What's the reality? It's real. It's real. It's really real. Okay, let's go. Thank you.
Right behind. Keep going, keep going.
David, they want us. We're going to take a picture back together. This is our scheme. You see how well we work?
But it was very clear from the beginning that these guys did not look at things the same way. Childs and his team would present, technical issues and how they proposed to solve them or options for solving them. And Libeskind's comments tended to be focused on more ethereal, symbolic, and general issues. I think Dan said, the top has to be more meaningful, and that you could see that Child's blood rising.
I think that, in fact, that Daniel Libeskind thought that he would have more of a role, that I was going to be somehow change and be willing to just execute his role as the designer. Frankly, Larry wouldn't permit that.
He's an industrialist. He wants to make profits. He has an empire. It's not a philanthropic enterprise. It's how to create profits, which I appreciate. What would New York be if people were not entrepreneurial to want to make money? But that often came into tension with other ideas.
When our work is done, the history of Lower Manhattan will have been written, not by the terrorists who attacked our city, but by the millions of New Yorkers who stood up to defend it. By the 5th anniversary of the attack, September 11th, 2006, we will top off a new icon, the 1,776-foot tall Freedom Tower.
I've asked people close to the governor, was that political calculation or a spur of the moment, naming it the Freedom Tower? And the best answer I've heard is that it had been discussed, but no one had really signed off on it, and no one was sure of it until it came out of his mouth during a speech.
What is 1776? It's a symbol of our freedom. It's the year we proclaimed our independence. So it just made sense. That word just kind of fell in and fit the building.
There was a letter in the New York Post that was brilliant. The letter said, "This building is nothing but a perch for George Pataki to climb up and gaze off in the direction of Washington." And that was true. Pataki was actively using the process to further his political ambitions, as any politician would.
Good morning. We're here today for the unveiling of the model of the Freedom Tower. When Daniel Libeskind revealed his master site plan, the idea was to create a building, the tallest building in the world, yes, but symbolically 1,776 feet tall. But mostly today is a celebration of the successful collaboration of two brilliant architects who understand that this is not just a building. This is a symbol of freedom. So to Daniel Libeskind and to David Childs, congratulations.
Cool. That's it? Don't trip now as we go over. Are we ready?
70-76. The top of the
70,
spire is
that's it.
76.
That's it.
When Libeskind and Childs allegedly started working together, the kind of face-saving design that came out of that had this big stick on top. And that stick and the numbers 1776 were the only thing that survived of the original Libeskind concept. They presented this huge model. It was 10 feet tall or something, and it lit from within, and who knows how much money was spent on it. And as they were moving it out of the Federal Hall where they had the presentation, the SOM guys broke the stick off so it could clear the door. You know, and that was the last we saw of Danny's stick.
No matter what people talk about buildings or their real estate, ground zero is ground zero for what happened there. So the most important thing was how we were going to remember what happened there to those people.
And this eternal flame will be visible just like the tower was, so you don't have to come to this memorial to remember what happened here.
The key feature of my design is that every visitor will clearly visualize and absorb the enormity of this sacrifice. Every victim will be represented by his or her own individual life-sized human statue.
We could then have 2 or 3 foot crystal birds, one for each life lost.
We wanted public involvement. So we invited submissions, and we got thousands.
More than 5,000 people submitted proposals for a memorial at the site of the World Trade Center. Today, a committee chose this one. It's called Reflecting Absence. Designed by New Yorker Michael Arad, it will include the names of everyone killed in the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center.
I was working as an assistant architect for the New York City Housing Authority Design Department when I found out there was a competition for the design of the memorial. And I had to do this. There's no sort of rational explanation for why you get so drawn into it. I came across this quarry in South Orange, and there's just something very beautiful and evocative about it because it had that sort of clearly traced out absence of all the rock that had been excavated out, but was softened by the water and by the trees. And I think that helped me to start thinking about the Memorial Plaza. Days after the attack, I remember biking around Lower Manhattan at night, and I made my way to Washington Square Park, and I found myself standing near that central fountain, the round fountain, and people had placed candles there. And I felt like I was part of that group. You know, I came there not knowing anybody, not a word was said. And I left a few minutes later without having said anything to anybody, but I left completely changed. All of a sudden, that notion of sort of being coolly removed from the life of the city, I mean, that just shattered. You were part of a greater whole. You had to be.
Our neighborhood here in Yonkers is full of police officers and firefighters. So after 9/11, I met other family members, and they were very, very intent on making sure that, as they said, the brothers were listed with their ranks. And I thought that was a no-brainer. So they asked me, would I care to join the group advocating for 9/11 issues? And this seemed like such a simple thing to become involved in.
I mean, simple things like, what's the order of the names? Is it organized alphabetically by last name? Is it organized alphabetically by last name within the firemen's group? Are the firemen over here and the police over here? I mean, these are things that were debated for years.
The mayor started seeing that the memorial was not coming together as quickly or as well as everybody had hoped, and he took ownership of it. He literally stepped up, became the chairman of the board, raised the money, and started to push the construction schedules through.
Mayor Bloomberg, it's his way or the highway. That's what I have felt. He's a man that cast us aside and made us seem like we couldn't get over our grief.
People's views change with time. There's an emotion that as soon as you lose a loved one that is very different than an emotion that you have 5 and 10 and 20 years later. And we have to make sure we don't respond to the first and in fact have a better perspective. That's not to say that you treat people cavalierly or don't listen to them.
The mayor, the LMDC, they were able to say, oh, look at these families. They're constantly complaining. And then when other issues came up, oh, look, here comes the families again. They're slowing the process down. They actually blamed us for slowing Ground Zero down.
And so they actually stopped bugging the mayor. But they went to Pataki and they found a very receptive ear in Pataki.
We always tried to include family members every step of the way as decisions were made and listen to them. And when you have, obviously, thousands and thousands of family members, you're never going to have unanimity. You're going to have divergent opinions.
Just when the effects of the governor's race were winding down, the Republicans announced that in 2004 they'd be hosting the Republican convention, in Midtown, but within kind of easy commute from Ground Zero. And it was clear that Pataki couldn't allow Ground Zero to be a festering mess of selfish infighting as it had become. We need to show some progress.
On July 4th, as fireworks burst in the sky, ephemeral reminders of our liberty, we will begin to reclaim our skyline with a permanent symbol of our freedom. On July 4th, 2004, we will break ground on the Freedom Tower.
The governor was in haste to plant his footprint at Ground Zero. And he had a beautiful cornerstone with quite a moving inscription on it to be planted at a spot where the Freedom Tower was going to rise.
First of all, towers don't have cornerstones, but if you want to lay a symbolic cornerstone, that's nice.
I remember it. But, I think it was a media event. It wasn't a construction event.
Today is the 4th of July, Independence Day. Today we lay the cornerstone for a new symbol of this city and of this country and of our resolve to triumph in the face of terror. Today we build the Freedom Tower.
As all these things, the choreography is charged. Politicians want to be seen in photos, certain kinds of settings. Who's in the picture, who's not in the picture has political ramifications. And I guess the vision that the state people had was, in the end, the politicians would be in the big shot that would end up on the front page of papers. And they didn't really want Larry in the shot. A lot of the politicians were uncomfortable with having somebody who was a business person in the middle of this. But Larry, when they walked over to the cornerstone and inspected it, Larry went with the flow. after it's over, I'm walking out, and one or two of the Pataki aides buttonhole me and begin to really let me have it, yelling at me, in full view of my wife, about how Larry had ruined the shot because he didn't follow the choreography and he went with the group when he was supposed to, I guess, magically disappear. It just was a reminder at the time that they had mixed feelings about private developers being part of this story and about this private developer being part of the story of the rebuilding, even though we were the ones who were building the buildings.
We were ready to go with the Freedom Tower, the tallest building ever built in America, and a symbol of our freedom. And it was all set.
But the one thing that nobody knew was that the Port Authority and the police department had not communicated well about issues concerning security features in that building.
Because that base, that exposed base of the Freedom Tower design at that point was considered by the NYPD to be a severe terrorist risk, and where the building was placed, which was quite close to the highway, was also perceived by the NYPD to be placing the building at risk of a car bombing. So the building was going to have to be moved, therefore making the cornerstone laying absolutely pointless. When that communication started with the Port Authority is a matter of first controversy and then burial. Apparently, there were claims that, yes, the NYPD sent a letter, but it got lost.
How can this be? In this modern era, this day and age, with communication over this, how can this possibly happen? The complete lack of coordination between the two.
If the letter was such a big deal, if I was on the other end of that letter and didn't get a response, I probably would have gotten the phone and called and said, "Did you get my letter?"
And the whole project just stopped dead.
Mr. Mayor, with regard to the Freedom Towers, why are security concerns just now being presented?
Well, they're not just now being. You couldn't be more wrong. The security concerns have been there since 1993. 1993, there was a bombing at the World Trade Center, and we did not learn our lesson. This is a building, particularly the Freedom Tower, that is built to be a symbol. And we are not going to rush into doing anything that doesn't take into account the security measures that the police department and plenty of other people think are appropriate.
It's impossible to describe the frustration that we all felt. In effect, we had to go back and come up with a new building.
I was crushed by it, literally crushed. I felt it was terribly unfair and a tragic waste of time, effort, energy, and money that was needed for purposes of rebuilding the Trade Center.
That changed the game entirely because we couldn't modify the building. We couldn't move it onto another site. So we were, in effect, by that decision, given a clean slate of clean sheet of paper to work on.
The building moved to the east away from the road. And then we came up with a completely new design.
New York officials today unveiled the latest redesign of the Freedom Tower to be built at Ground Zero with a reinforced concrete base for bomb protection. The tower will be 1,776 feet tall, its proportions and external skin recalling the lost Twin Towers.
I can remember shuttling back and forth between Daniel and David, trying to get Daniel to say that this is a beautiful building, and and he kept looking, and finally he said, "Yeah, I think I like it. I think I like it." So I called up the governor's office, said, "Daniel's going to say nice things. I think we're not going to have an issue there."
The tower that we have now, after all the efforts, is even a better tower than we had before. It is a slender tower. It's an elegant tower. It's a tower that rises in a crystal.
Daniel Libeskind was part of that in name only. He had absolutely nothing to do with what we now know as the Freedom Tower. All that's left of Libeskind's influence is the height of the building.
The new design was rolled out without people criticizing it, and we were back in business, in effect, building.
Well, today, a federal jury decided that for insurance purposes, the destruction of the World Trade Center was two separate events, not one, as insurance companies were hoping for. And this means the leaseholder, Larry Silverstein, can collect twice from some companies because separate planes hit the two towers. This decision is the latest twist in Silverstein's efforts to turn his $3.5 billion insurance policy on the Trade Center complex into a $7 billion payout.
And in the end, we ended up recovering the equivalent of about $4.5 billion of insurance. Now, mind you, that $4.5 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's not enough money to rebuild the office space that was destroyed.
It was decided to approach him and say, can we renegotiate the deal and perhaps lessen your rental obligations and return some of the sites to the Port Authority, who would then go on and develop them.
The deal must be reached today between World Trade Center leaseholder Larry Silverstein and the Port Authority, which owns the land, on what to do with the site beyond the memorial. Governor Pataki set the March 14th deadline last year in an effort to get the rebuilding ball rolling.
We gave them proposal after proposal. We couldn't get any response. And they left everything to literally the last 2 days.
We got to the day of the deadline, and our teams were working all day at our offices. And I was there. I was going from room to room, and we were progressing. We broke for dinner and hoped everybody would be back by 7 o'clock or so, and we were going to continue the discussions and hopefully consummate a deal. And I ordered pizza out for our folks, and we sat around my conference table eating pizza. As I read later, Larry and his team were so ecstatic, they ordered from a French restaurant and had a party. And they didn't come back. And we kept calling, asking, where are you? Well, we're meeting with our key people, and we'll be there, we'll be there.
And we came back, and it was about 9 or so, 9:30. Larry Silverstein sat down, drank 2 cups of coffee because he thought we were going to be there for a long time.
And I think he and his team, and again, it's only my perception, felt that because there was a deadline and that we wanted to honor the governor's wishes, that perhaps there was more nickels on the table for him. I walked down the hall, and Larry and his team were sitting at the table, and everybody is sitting around there smiling, and I think I felt like an ancient Roman going into the Colosseum with the lions.
Ken Ringler came into that conference room where we were sitting, and in very blue language, told us to get the F out of his office, to pay our effing rent, and you know, we were a bunch of bums, and they were coming after us.
All I remember is being surprised as hell because we genuinely were there for the purpose of making a deal with the port that night, clearly. And I just, it made no sense to me, literally made no sense. And then, of course, the next day, the fusillade. Right?
We thought we were moving in the right direction. Then at 11:35, was it, sir?
11:35.
11:35, they came back with a proposal where their demands were just as high as they were before. They're increasing their demands, and quite honestly, in my view, I think they thought they had leverage, that we were going to back down because we wanted to get a deal and we wanted to move the Freedom Tower forward. We're not going to make a short-sighted deal with Larry Silverstein.
Negotiations with the port collapsed. Next thing I know, in the New York Times, Governor to Larry Silverstein, stand aside. You're obstructing progress. That's a sign, right? Oh my God.
Larry was losing the public battle. And within days, there was a New York Times editorial. The political leaders galvanized around it and said, no, enough is enough. We decided to put an agreement together and bring it back to Larry and basically not say take it or leave it, but as I told Larry when I brought it up to him, it's as close to take it or leave it as we're going to get.
Good evening. An agreement between World Trade Center developer Larry Silverstein and the Port Authority means construction on the Freedom Tower could finally begin, perhaps by week's end.
The deal will give the Port Authority control of the long-delayed Freedom Tower, but reward Silverstein with 3 other prime development sites along the eastern side of Ground Zero.
That was when we relinquished control of the Freedom Tower and Tower 5 and kept Towers 2, 3, and 4. Did we think it was fair? Not necessarily, but the important thing was to keep the momentum going.
What we got out of the deal was a commitment by the Port Authority that they would dig the hole on the east side of the site, the 80-foot hole, and put in the infrastructure and fully prepare those sites for construction.
If you remember, New York City was attacked 4.5 years ago, and since that time, we have been locked in a vicious battle over construction of the tallest, shiniest, terrorist, tauntiest skyscraper in the world, the 1,776-foot tall Freedom Tower.
Today we lay the cornerstone for a new symbol of this city and of this country and of our resolve to triumph in the face of terror.
So that was the site 2 years ago, and today, oh.
Good morning. This is a great day for New York and a great day for America. Today we begin construction on the Freedom Tower, the final...
When the press would start ranting and raving about no progress, there'd be a ceremony. I never went to any of them.
The cornerstone had to come out because the Freedom Tower had to be redesigned. The cornerstone had been sitting in a plywood box. They're taking this thing out, not literally under the cover of night, but goddamn close to the cover of night. No one is supposed to know that they're pulling. It's too much of an embarrassment to let anyone in the media know that this is going to happen.
What became of the cornerstone itself?
I honestly don't know, but to me, I've thought it would be nice to have it in the lobby of the actual Freedom Tower that's constructed. I haven't had a chance to talk to David Childs about it.
My joke was always to drive it to Pataki's house, you know, and put it on his front lawn, ring the doorbell, and drive away as fast as you can.
One of the ironies is during the middle of all of the drama back in the spring of '06, we opened 7 World Trade Center.
That's the best thing Larry did was he went in, he just plowed ahead, rebuilt World Trade Center number 7. And I think that was important for the public to see construction and to see action down there and to see something coming out of the ground.
It saw a finished product. It saw something that was high style, that was green, and that gave confidence that downtown could and would be reborn as a business district.
And they looked at what was going on across the street. Havoc. I mean, just disaster across the street, right? Getting nowhere with the port. Here we finished the building, and all of a sudden people started looking and said, what's he doing that's so bad? What's he doing that's so wrong? Maybe he's not the problem. People started looking and saying, maybe it's not the problem.
The design initially suggested these memorial galleries, which would surround the pools some 30 feet below the plaza. And so the idea was that you would walk up to the edge of these voids, sort of peer down below, and then go on this very, emotionally fraught processional experience of sort of walking into the earth almost, walking right up to the names, which would be displayed behind the waterfalls in this very sort of quiet, cloister-like space.
In advocating for the ranks of the firefighters, we were invited to Michael Arad's office to speak at that. And we were in the meeting room, in the conference room, and all around were aspects of the memorial, but there was a 3-dimensional model of the memorial. And up to that point, none of us had really questioned where the names were going. But then we saw the 3-dimensional model, and we realized the names were going to be underneath the waterfalls, at the base of the waterfalls, underground. You would have to descend down, almost as though you were going into the subway, descend down underground into a confined space to view the names. And that shocked us. Knowing now about 1993, about 2001, I will never go down. I will never bring my children underground at Ground Zero because I feel it's always going to be the number one target site of the terrorists. They've come twice. What better place than to get us all while we're underground? I mean, it never made sense to me.
It would be so easy for this design to be changed in a fundamental way. And, you know, while every suggestion that was made by somebody who cares deeply about the memorial, was not necessarily consistent with the design that was selected and that I felt was my obligation to champion and be responsible for. How do you build a moment of silence? This is what this is.
Write down the ideas because, 4 hours from now you'll forget what the hell you were talking about. This is America's memorial, as they all like to say. America doesn't know what she's getting. New Yorkers don't know, and Americans don't know.
Yeah, that's insane.
Thank you very much. And you know they're spending $1.2 billion on this? And
On a memorial that nobody wants.
Nobody wants. No. We bring out the sleeping bags and we bring out warmer clothes to spend the night here. 9/11 families have always been somewhat out in the public, but this was taking a step where people could really be critical of you, saying that you had flipped your lid, And, you could feel that. You could feel that maybe I'm so deep into this. Maybe I'm carrying it too far. But the first nights down there, I knew that it was the right thing to do. We looked out into the vast openness, and we could just say this was their spot. And we're defending it.
They're being touted as the last pieces in the rebirth of Lower Manhattan. The 3 towers, 2, 3, and 4, will replace about 6 million square feet of the 10 million destroyed in the attack. Norman Foster's tower is the largest of the 3 buildings. It's taller than the Empire State Building and has diamond-like paneling along the top. Richard Rogers' tower is far sleeker in design, and Fumiko Maki's, the first to be built, will have a restaurant with panoramic views.
Good morning.
That's Damien.
Hello, Damien. Good morning. How are you this morning? Okay.
And we're in deep discussion with the port and the transit authorities about that.
You have less congestion by pulling this in and having these out here. Mm-hmm. All during this time, we're plowing ahead, because we had government said you need design, finished plans, specifications, so forth for towers 2, 3, and 4. We did them. 18 months, we finished the plans, specifications, done. All right, ready to go, ready to shovel the ground. Is this width the same as this width? And guess what? No ground on which to put a shovel. Why? Because the sites aren't ready. The sites the Port Authority is supposed to deliver to us, not ready. We know what it takes to dig a hole, but for some reason your people are taking longer, much longer than has ever been taken, right? What's taken so long, right?
What happened was they had another groundbreaking. And they started construction of this PATH train station, designed by Santiago Calatrava.
And I remember the Port Authority had going to Santiago and saying, "Is it expensive?" And he said, "Of course it is."
Okay, build me the world's most expensive subway stop. $2 billion? No, make it $4 billion. The wings are going to open like a dove twice a year. Or maybe not.
And what increasingly became clear is that this train station, which they called the Oculus because of its shape, was actually an octopus that was killing all the other projects around it. Because they were sticking all their mechanical system, their air conditioning, their heating, to support this train station, were being pushed into other buildings. It was creating all kinds of complexities and delays.
In my perusal, just in the first days of my administration, I couldn't really find anyone that knew what was being built, who was building it, when it would be completed, and how, in what fashion it would actually be erected.
And one of the first things that Patterson did when he came in was to replace the head of the Port Authority with a new guy named Chris Ward.
It's great, they're all tied off.
We wanted it to be symbolic. We wanted it to be monumental. That could have and should have remained at a certain level, but it became to dominate the whole project literally right down into the ground. And when it dominated it down into the ground, the project lost its logic and lost its constructability.
Chris Ward's a guy who was smart enough to come into office and recognize that everyone had been lying, everyone had been bullshitting for years. Everyone had held press conferences and made promises, and none of those press conferences meant a goddamn thing, and none of those promises could be kept.
After looking at the construction solutions that Chris Ward and the staff of the Port Authority have been able to establish, I am comfortable today by telling you that on September 11th, 2011, 10 years to the date of that disaster, there will be an open memorial at Ground Zero to those who lost their lives that day.
We made a major commitment that the plaza would be open on the 10-year anniversary. The fountains would be functioning, the water would fall, and that was the commitment we made. But it was a lot more complicated, and there were some real fundamental disconnects in what had to get built, and how it would get built, and who would build it, that had to really get completely sorted out.
Things are sliding further and further and further behind as we progressed, right? As the days went by, the days, the months.
The mayor, advocate for the city, saw that things were in fact stalled, took it upon himself to bring us together in a Gracie Mansion summit. He brought the governors together from both states. He brought Larry, and he brought me there.
When they're not making progress, you shake things up. You put them in a room with a big pot of coffee and lock the doors with no bathrooms. You'd be surprised how quickly they come to an agreement.
It was one of those moments that I'm sure the mayor was very, very disappointed. If you go to Gracie Mansion, the whole idea is you have a success when you leave. But you couldn't on that day solve all the problems that the mayor had hoped we would.
At some point, the anger gives way to just depression because you think, how are we going to ever get out of this?
Let me hear you one more time. What do we want these jobs? What do we want these jobs?
The finger pointing has got to stop. It's almost 9 years after 9/11. Instead of a shining symbol of American resilience and strength, we have a hole in the ground.
The construction workers in New York are so out of work. At this point, this is 6 months after Lehman Brothers went down, and we're in the middle of this incredible economic collapse.
And you could take a pessimistic view and go, maybe this worldwide recession is going to be deep. It's going to be long, and that we're not going to come out of it quickly. We had a study that said maybe the market's not back all the way until 2037.
People were not down for waiting another 25 years to get the World Trade Center rebuilt.
Build it now! Build it now! Build it now! Build it now!
It was kind of a great moment because everybody's chanting, "Build it now." And it was like, who are they talking to? They were talking to me because I was the one guy who was there that would answer the question, could you build it now? They were convinced that we were the ones who were slowing it down.
We need to urge Chris, Larry, the city to get back to the table, to find a solution so that these two towers can be built, and they can be built now.
No more excuses. It's time for us to all put our shoulders to the wheel, work together to get the job done. And I think that was a game changer.
And today we have found an agreement that we feel will allow us to complete the reconstruction of the World Trade Center site.
Wow, this is progress. This is probably the most important part of the project from the Port Authority's commitment to deliver the plaza for the anniversary. We have to have this done or the plaza will not be completed. But you stand here and think, are they going to be able to get it all done? We're doing really well. I have no expectation that we won't deliver, but imagine that if we don't.
What's up, Vinny?
What's going on, Jim? How are you, buddy?
I got it right here. The one coming through from this way here is tied in.
Tied in.
All right. I gotta get all the way out to the street 5 feet by today. All right. Over there, those two beehive strainers. When you look at it like this, it's just amazing how many people killed that day. Well, I lost my mother on 9/11. She was on the 94th floor of the North Tower. I don't know what to say. That's just, it's hard to imagine it's 10 years already. It really is. That's all we have right here.
Bringing the names up to the plaza, when that decision was made against my wishes, it felt like a tremendous blow. And, but if it is a child, if it is your child and it's injured, you don't walk away from it. You stay involved. You keep caring. My hope is that when the memorial opens up, whatever dissatisfactions have been expressed up until now, some of those fears might be assuaged. We'll see. I mean, that's the missing ingredient for the memorial right now. It's that interaction between the public and the memorial. What you have right now are, it's the stage that's set for that, for that encounter. Bye, sweetie. I'm leaving now. Last night, 11 o'clock or so, all of a sudden I had this urge to jump in the car and drive to see the site to make sure that everything's there. Sort of last minute. If you want to make sure everything is just right.
Sean? You can put on Uncle Sean's shirt? Gotta put on Uncle Sean's shirt.
Today's going to be really difficult, but it's a moment I've been waiting for.
At least have a couple of bites, Sean. I'll give Patty then a little bit of your English muffin.
They had a truck and there was bombs in the truck, and they moved it into the garage.
Daddy went over there to see if he could find Uncle Sean. I don't know if you ever knew that, too.
He did? I didn't know that.
And it'll be nice to see Uncle Sean saying.
Yeah.
God, isn't it a beautiful day?
Oh, yes.
They had predicted rain for yesterday and today.
Go on, just go past them slowly. Go further. You're going to go straight.
I got it.
Danemark.
Good morning, ma'am.
Silverstein.
Straight ahead, sir.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you,
Have a
ma'am.
great day.
Likewise, ma'am.
He was just beaming that morning. He was all lit up in the house, had such a smile. He was wearing his lovely shirt that he had gotten Ireland with a white collar, and he just looked so good and smiling.
Yes, they are very smart. Where's Grandma? Keep Grandma with us.
Please join in observing our first moment of silence.
Delamero Abad. Vincent Paul Abate. Lawrence Christopher Abel.
Albert Balewa Blackman Jr.
Christopher Joseph Blackwell.
Carrie Rosetta Blackburn.
Susan Leigh Blair.
It's easy to think about all the strife, all the disagreement, to sort of focus on, well, you know, this didn't go right, that didn't go right. Well, actually, the big picture, something went right, really right.
At the end of the day, it's a good thing to see everything now moving in unison down the track and getting built, because this is important to New York. You have to develop a very thick skin. Really take the long view, a very long view. And criticism, white noise.
That's Sean's name. I mean, he's one of these people listed on this memorial. That's the shocker. I think, you know, you say, God, that was my flesh and blood that got caught up in all of this.
I don't know if the city will ever be whole. The people who are lost, the families who experience that, you can never put that back or replace. But there's a part of the city's self-respect that I think is going to be restored.
This is not Rome, in which you want to hold it as it now is, as a great historic monument, but something which evolves and changes. That's the nature of New York.
It's an incredibly healthy thing that the city responded to September 11th in sort of classic New York fashion by beating each other up and grandstanding and political manipulation. And you can say that, oh, that's awful. Or you can say, what a wonderful thing that New York healed this big wound with more New York.